good evening and welcome to the storytelling feature of the show tonight. I've got a live studio guest this evening, and as they say, way back on TV all those years ago, what's your name and where do you come from?
My name is Terrie Howey and I come from Hampshire, and that's mostly sort of my zone, but I go all over.
And what's the name of your storytelling company?
Red Phoenix Storytelling and Productions.
An early plug in there.
Yes, indeed.
On this evening's show. Thank you very much for coming into the studio tonight. My first question this evening, how did you get into storytelling?
The very first that I can remember doing storytelling was when I was 4 years old in my infant school playground, because I literally started when I was 4, and I can remember sitting there with a sketch pad doing Rolf Harris style drawing my characters and telling stories to the other kids, and then I totally forgot about it, went off, had a career in theatre. And it was while I was in Edinburgh, I started doing the tours, the ghost tours, and doing the street tellings. And then I got involved with the Scottish Storytelling Centre and went, this is a career? Why didn't nobody tell me this beforehand? And I've been a professional storyteller pretty much ever since.
Really? So how long ago was that? When did you get into it?
I've been professionally telling for about 8 years now.
Excellent. Excellent. What type of skills do you think storytellers need to possess?
Good visualisation and memory, I think, is key, because you're having to remember lots of details and you're having to visualise the stories so that you can communicate them to your audience. Right.
And what... when you say visualisation, what do you do to visualise? What's it you see? Part of the story, or?
Well, I'm severely dyslexic, so I find that my entire mind works in pictures. And so when I'm hearing a story, reading a story, I build images in my mind. So scene by scene, it's almost like having a DVD running in my head. So I've got coming up to about 300 stories in my head now, and it's just like a huge, great big blockbusters in there. When I want to tell a new tale, I just pull out that one and off I go. But it's building the images, and then as the images are there in your mind, conveying that, but not conveying every single detail, because you want to allow your listener to be able to build their own image, because they'll hear what they need from the story, much as I'll hear what I need from the story. So everybody's different, and that's the beauty of storytelling. It can give so much to everybody.
Excellent stuff. Do you find that your dyslexia, that did you sort of challenge yourself and say, look, I'm going to do this, like I'm going to tackle it sort of head on, because for me personally, I chose to get into hospital radio to help me with my stammer. So did you find that was why you got into storytelling, to sort of like tackle your dyslexia?
Totally. I found that reading and writing was, although I love reading and I do write lots of stories, I found it a huge, great challenge. And stories is how I've always made sense of the world, sort of a narrative. If I can find a narrative and create those pictures in my mind, then I can understand, and it makes the world a much easier place to operate in. So stories have been my key throughout. That's probably why I was using them as 4 years old, when I just started school, and it was suddenly this huge, great change in having to do academic stuff.
Gosh, excellent. You've brought along 3 stories tonight. What's the name of your first story?
The first story, it doesn't really have a title, it's just sort of known as a storytelling parable.
Right, okay, and where does the story come from? What's the background?
It's just an old folk tale, really. So it's the writer or whoever sort of first wrote it down is sort of unknown. It's one of those lost ones that I sort of discovered en route somewhere.
Excellent. You're going to be telling the 3 stories 100% live and loud, aren't you?
Oh, yes.
There's no pre-recorded sessions here, folks.
No.
This is going to be Terrie live and loud. When you're ready, Terrie, take it away.
Excellent. There was once a small village, and in that village there lived an exceptionally good storyteller. And he told his tales and people listened, and everybody had their own favourite tale. And it didn't matter how many times they'd heard him tell it before, they would beg for more and again and again. And so he would tell his tales. But after a little while he thought, if I'm this popular in my village, I might do really well if I go elsewhere. And so he did. He packed his bags and he wandered from village to village, town to town, city to city, and everywhere he went he told his stories and people loved them. But after a while he started to get a little bit lonely. He started to think about home, how much he missed his friends and his family, those familiar things. And so after weeks, months, years of being on the road, he decided to return home. And the celebrations that happened when he came back to that small little village. Everybody was delighted to see him. They welcomed him with open arms. And that night they were going to have a feast. And the best of the feast would be given to the storyteller, and he would tell his tales. And so they ate and they drank till their bellies were full and tight. And by the fire, as it roared away, the storyteller stood up and started to tell his tales that he'd shared with that village long ago. But as he told his tales, the strangest thing occurred. Although everybody clapped and cheered at the end of them, people murmured, "Oh, I really like that one. Cassandra tells that one. Oh, that's especially good. That's one of my favourite of Peter's. Oh, I particularly like that one. Bob does a really good version." And when the storyteller heard this, he realised that since he'd been gone, the stories didn't just stop. The people who had loved his stories had taken them and started telling them themselves. And he suddenly got really worried and concerned, and he rushed off to go and see the wise man of the village, and he said, "What am I going to do? Everybody's taken my stories. They belong to me. How do I get them back?" The wise man smiled and looked at the storyteller and said, "If you can go and gather me a handful of fine sand and bring it back to me just in your hands, then I will tell you how you can get your stories back." And so it was that the storyteller went off and he found some fine sand and he picked it up. But the strangest thing occurred. The more that he tried to hold on to it, the more it drizzled out between his fingers. The tighter he held, the more he lost. And by the time he got back to the wise man, he opened up his hand and there were just a few small grains left in his palm. The wise man looked at the storyteller and said, "Do you understand that your stories, just like the sand, cannot be held on to? When you tell a story, you give it freely, and people who hear it, they'll take it into themselves. Giving stories is the greatest gift that you can give." And when the storyteller heard that, he realized the truth of it. And from that day forth, every time he told a story, he told people to take his stories, to tell his stories, and to share his stories. And interestingly enough, he became a better storyteller for it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that one, Terry. Really good. Where do you get your ideas for your stories from? Where do you pick them up?
A lot of it is some stories I hear, some stories I write, some stories I find in really old books. I like working with history. History absolutely fascinates me. So very often I'll go off and I'll research something, a particular time in history or a particular event, and sometimes I create stories just out of those events. I do a lot of work with Butser Ancient Farm down near Petersfield. They do Iron Age archaeology, and they have roundhouses there, and they have a Roman villa, and it's fabulous going and telling in the roundhouse there. There's no experience like it. You've got the fire burning in the centre, everybody gathered around, and you can really feel sort of the ancestry of storytelling right behind you when you're telling. So a lot of it comes from the research that I do, or just going off and finding stuff. Something will just tweak my interest.
Excellent. Now, do you prefer to tell stories standing up or sitting down?
Definitely standing up.
Do you?
I'm quite physical. I think that's from my previous life in theatre. I'm quite physical when I tell my stories, and so I don't just speak my stories, I generally use my entire body to tell them.
Yeah. Excellent. Some of the previous storytellers that we've had on the show, they've said that when they tell a story that it comes out completely different, like each time. Is that something that you're laughing, so I'm guessing that yes, that happens as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I think it has something to do with every different audience brings something different. They need something different, and you kind of pick up on that a little bit. Human beings are very, very good at being empathic to each other, and I think that's kind of a raw essence of storytelling. You have to kind of get a general feel of why you're in that space telling your story to that particular audience. And sometimes they'll throw heckles out and stuff, and you'll take information from that and use that to shape how you're going to tell the story, or they'll be laughing at particular aspects and not at others, and so you get a feel as you're going what intentions you need to sort of pull out of your story so that audience will enjoy it. And every audience is different, so every time you tell a story it's different.
That's interesting. So how do you deal with the heckling side of it?
I actually quite enjoy heckles because it keeps me on my toes and it keeps me thinking. I've said that now on air, so every storytelling show I get after this, everybody's going to be heckling. Oh. But no, I think it comes from starting off as a street teller. There was heckles all the time. You know, you'd be dealing with people that you were telling stories to. You'd be dealing with passers-by, and on the streets of Edinburgh at sort of 11, 12 o'clock at night telling stories. It's you had some interesting characters that would come up and start heckling.
I bet you do. Okay, what's your next story called?
My next story is called Durgen and the Unseen Terror, and this is one that I actually penned.
Excellent stuff. Well, I'd like to hear a lot more about this particular story. I'll let you tell it first, though. So in your own time, Terry, the floor is yours.
Now, I've never met a person who doesn't enjoy a good story. And there was a village long ago where everybody liked stories. They would gather around the fire and they would tell tales, but they only told tales about one particular subject, and that was the unseen terror. The wise man of the village would start. He would stand up and he would describe how the unseen terror was as tall as 100 trees, as wide as 80 houses, and that it would crush your bones as soon as look at you. And once he had finished his tale, his wife would look at him and go, "Tsh, tsh, tsh. That's not it at all. The unseen terror is invisible, and it would suck the flesh off your bones before you had time to think, oh dear." And once they'd finished, well, other people would join in. It had 1,000 eyes, 1 billion arms. It was like a snake. It was like a huge, great dinosaur. Everybody had their own version of what the unseen terror truly was. And just like every person has their own version of what truly, truly terrifies them. But there was one little lad who listened intently to these stories, and his name was Durgen. And he would sit and listen to all the different stories, and he'd think to himself, but I want to know what the unseen terror really looks like. And so he would go around the village, and he would ask each person, "Excuse me, what did the unseen terror look like the last time you saw it?" And they would laugh at him, until he finally got round to the wise man, and he asked him exactly the same question. What did the unseen terror look like the last time you saw him? The wise man started to laugh. "The unseen terror the last time I saw him? Oh, that's a good one. The reason he's the unseen terror is because he's never been seen. The only thing you ever see is the damage and destruction he leaves." But that wasn't enough for Durgen. He made up his mind that very moment that he was going to go off around the great big wide world and find out what the unseen terror looked like for himself. So he packed his bags, and first thing in the morning he left the village to the sobs of his mother. and to the laughs of the other villagers, who thought he was as mad as a badger, who can get very mad if you start to pull faces at them. And he left. And he started to walk. And he searched and he searched and he searched, and he looked high and he looked low, he looked round and he looked about. And the first time he stopped, he asked people if they had seen the unseen terror. And he saw destruction all about, and they said, yes, the unseen terror has been here, but the unseen terror was here about a month ago. And so Durgen carried on walking. And the next time he stopped, he asked the same question, and they said, oh, yes, the unseen terror has been here. He's been here about a week ago. And the third time he stopped, he asked the same question once more. And they said, yes, the unseen terror was here a day ago. And as Durgen looked around at the ground, there was blood and guts and gore, broken trees, smashed houses, and he saw the devastation for himself. And so he walked a little bit further until he came to a lonely mountain, and there he stood. And in that moment he realized he was where he wanted to be. For there was that sinking feeling in his stomach, that cold spine tingle going up and down, and he knew for sure that something was watching him. Then, with a mighty roar, as loud as thunder and as quiet as a whisper, he heard it. The unseen terror. And he turned around, and there it was, coming closer and closer and closer. Durgen. His heart beat so loud and so hard that he couldn't hear his brain scream, "Run!" His feet froze to the ground. The colour started to drain from his head, down his face, even his clothes, and out through his toes into the ground. And there he stood, stock still, frozen to the spot, as white as a statue, as that unseen terror got closer and closer and closer with it. The trouble is, I don't really know what the unseen terror looks like, because I wasn't stupid enough to go looking for it. But Durgen still stood there, right to this very day, as still as a statue and as white as marble, looking at the place where that unseen terror once was. I say once, because it's not there anymore. It's out there, somewhere. Pleasant dreams.
Brilliant stuff, Terrie. Thank you. Where does that story come from? What's the background behind that one?
I wrote it for a Halloween session at Butts Ancient Farm, where it needed to be something incorporating with Iron Age life and sort of wanting to prove yourself as a warrior. That was very key to Iron Age philosophy. And so that's really kind of how it started off, and it just sort of grew in my head. So I don't know quite, anything else that sort of fed into it. It just appeared one day.
All right. And how long does it take you to learn and write a story?
Writing a story sometimes is a bit longer, depending on if I'm doing it for a research. So I have to go off and research. I then get the facts, decide what facts would make a good story, then develop it and create a story from it. If I'm learning a story, then I've actually got really, really quick at learning a story, and I think that again goes back to sort of the dyslexia and the image building in my head. I've got it down to about 10 minutes now, depending on the length of the story. If it's a short story, then I can do it quite quickly. If it's a long story, then I might need a couple of days and a bit of rehearsal.
Right, because I thought you were going to say like 10 days or 10 hours, but not 10 minutes.
It started off, as quite a long period, and then it just sort of shortened. And I think it's more necessity than anything else, because I'm going to boast here now, I'm getting so much work that I haven't got really time to take 10 days between each thing, so I've had to push myself to get faster. Cool,
excellent. Well, I've been grilling you here. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break. We've got 30 seconds and we'll be speaking to Terrie straight after this. Yes, welcome back to the storytelling feature. I'm chatting to Terrie Howey, and just before the break, we're having a little bit of a chat there. She's given us 2 fantastic stories so far. Now, Terrie, why storytelling? Of all the things to choose, there may be, why not poetry or something like that?
I don't know. It just really spoke to me. That sounds really hairy-fairy, and I apologise for that, but it really did. There's just something in it. I love what storytelling can give. Every story has a lesson in it. Even if it's the most entertaining story, it still has things that we can learn out of it. And sharing a story with somebody is really, really special. People hear things in it, they discover things for themselves, and especially when you encourage new storytellers and see them discover it for themselves as well. That's really, really quite special, which is why I've sort of got involved just recently with the Young Storyteller of the Year competition that happens each year in Birmingham. And that's set up by Traditional Arts, Graham Langley, Pam Bishop and Fiona Collins, who are storytellers, and it's a really good event for 15 to 26-year-olds to showcase what they can do and support and develop. So I think that's quite key. So I would say that's pretty much
excellent. Because we've had Graham Langley, he's been on the show before, and we've also had who's it, Charlie Goodyear as well?
Yes.
Who was in the Young Storyteller?
Yes, indeed.
Of the year. So excellent stuff. Good. Do you think children would benefit from stories within school and storytelling themselves?
I think so. I think storytelling is really good for building empathy, because if you can listen to a story and identify with the characters and the emotion and the journey that they're going on, and you can imagine how that feels, then that starts to allow for people to imagine how it feels to be somebody else going through a hard time. Also, for children, it develops communication skills, logic skills, problem solving, confidence. The list goes on and on and on. There was I found out a tidbit of information just recently which really thrilled me. Apparently when they do MRI tests, they ask people to tell stories when they're looking at the brain, because storytelling engages quite a lot of pretty much the most part of your brain that any activity can do, because you're using memory, language, logic, all these different things are all firing off at the same time.
Okay.
And that in itself, I thought, wow, that's pretty special.
Excellent stuff. What's your final story called this evening?
My final story is The Old Lady in the Cave.
Okay, and background behind that story?
The background behind that story is I actually found it in a book while I was looking for something else totally different, and I was just scanning through, and this story just stuck out, and I just thought, that's a nice little treat. I like that one. I'll have that one, thank you.
Excellent stuff. Terrie, the floor is yours in your own time.
There was once a man who had everything. He was wealthy, had a good family, a good home, he was very good in his particular craft, and so it was that you would think that he would be a happy man. But he wasn't. You see, he always wanted something more, and he always wanted to know the truth. He always wanted to understand perfect truth, and so he said to his wife that he was going to go and search the world until he found truth. Now, being quite a wise woman, she turned round to her husband. She said, well, if you're going to go, you're going to put all the house, all the money and all the goods in my name, and then you can go off and do what you want. And so he did, and she was happy. And he went, and he searched for a year and a day, until on the top of an isolated mountain he found a cave, and he entered into that cave, and at the very back of that cave, with slimy walls and soggy floors, he found an old woman hunched over a fire, with greasy lank grey hair falling down her face, hardly a tooth in her mouth, wrinkles so bad it would make an elephant look like a baby's bottom. And he looked at her, and he said, Who are you? And she turned to him and she said, I am Truth. And the man, he was happy, for he had found what he was looking for, and he asked if she would teach him. And she agreed. And so for another year and a day, he studied with the old woman. And after a year and a day, he had learnt everything that she could tell him, every truth, every honesty in the world. And he knew it was time to return home. But as he was leaving, he wanted to do something for the old woman who had been so generous with her time. And so he said to her, Is there something I can do for you? What is it that I could take or give you? And the old woman, she looked at him and she said, Well, always, when you are speaking of me, tell the world that I am young and beautiful.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Terrie, for that final story this evening. Now, I believe you're going to be performing next weekend, is it? This weekend, rather?
This weekend, the bank holiday weekend, the 28th and 29th of May.
Plug the event.
Excellent. Well, we're going to be at the Hazelmere Fringe Festival, which actually starts on the 27th at 5:30, and most of it's happening on Lion Green in Hazelmere, or Lion's Den as it's being called for the weekend. And myself and Belinda McKenna will be telling stories for families from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon and Sunday afternoon. But in the evening we're giving something to the adults, because storytelling isn't just for children. So yes, we're going to be telling stories strictly for adults, and the event is called Hold On To Your Knickers. And I should say that that's not actually myself and Belinda performing. It is, but it's our alter egos as Mischief and Mayhem, the Havoc sisters, because chaos will rule within the small little yurt on Lion Green.
Oh, gee. Remind us of the dates for these events again.
That's the 28th and the 29th for the family storytelling in the afternoon, and at 8 p.m. on the 28th in the yurt is Hold On To Your Knickers. So make sure you've got some clean knickers on if you're going to come to that.
Brilliant. And for the benefit of the listeners, if they'd like to find out more information, do you have like a website, something that people can find out?
Yes, I do. If they go to www.redphoenixstory, or one word, or lowercase, .co.uk.
redphoenixstory.co.uk.
Yeah.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Terrie Howey, for coming in this evening and sharing your knowledge and 3 fantastic stories. Stay tuned, because after this, we'll have the triple track.
We all